The day I learned what had been happening in my own house began without thunder. I was sanding a maple rail in the shop when the phone in my pocket buzzed with a message that made the room feel a size smaller. My name is Daniel Reed. I build things that hold weight and live for years without complaint. That is how I was raised, and that is how I thought a marriage should behave if both people cared about the edges and the load. You make the cut square. You dry fit twice. You glue once and clamp with a gentle hand until the joint learns obedience. You do not rush. You do not pretend gaps will close on their own. The message was from a neighbor who prefers small talk about bird feeders and rain gutters. He said he had noticed my brother Evan using my side gate in the middle of the day while my truck was gone. He said another man had been with him once. He said he figured I should know because houses tell on us, and he did not want mine to tell the wrong story. I stared at the phone as if it had misread itself. Then I locked up the shop and drove home with my hands steady on the wheel and my head full of angles that did not add up. Our house sits at the bend of a street where mailboxes tilt in agreement. When I turned in, the yard looked ordinary, which is another way of saying it looked like a lie that had not been caught yet. I parked, stood for a moment, and listened. The wind worked the leaves. A dog 2 houses down announced a delivery truck on a different block. I walked to the door and looked at the smart lock like it might flinch. It did not. Locks do not apologize. They keep perfect memory because that is what they were made to do. I opened the app and saw entries I did not authorize, guessed codes I had not created, windows of access that match times when I teach at the shop or when I pick up supplies across town. The pattern formed a calm line across 2 months like footsteps in dust no one had brushed away. I thought about calling my wife Megan and asking for a story. I did not. Words come easy to her when a room is hot and a listener is kind. Stories bend around her mouth and land where she wants them. She sells for a living. She knows how to make pressure sound like charm. I stood in my kitchen and looked at the island we had built together and felt a draft in a house with the windows closed. Then I sat down at the table with a pencil and a sheet of paper and wrote the word slow. I tapped the paper with the pencil until the urge to storm down the hall left my body and went looking for someone else to ruin. I checked the doorbell camera. Clips stacked up like patient witnesses. There was Evan on a Tuesday near noon, glancing once at the lens and then smiling at some private joke before moving around the side yard. There was Evan again 3 days later with a bag over his shoulder and a look on his face that said he had been invited into a life he did not earn. The other man showed up once in a jacket I had seen at a barbecue at my parents' place. I could not place the face at first. Then I remembered a subcontractor we had both used on a deck job last spring. A friend of Evan who knows how to talk himself into work and back out of responsibility. I saved stills and times. I breathed through my nose like a carpenter who needs both hands to stay steady while the blade finishes the cut. I pulled bank statements and searched for the places that hide in plain sight. Boutique hotels near the highway, bars with live music and craft ice that makes bills grow long, jewelry stores that will ship to an address that is not a home if you tell them a sweet enough story. I marked charges that did not fit our usual shape. I kept every mark modest. I did not assign motive. Motive is a luxury. Facts are the tools that do the work. Megan walked in near 5 with a bag of groceries and a smile that looked rehearsed. She set items on the counter and talked about a client win that would cover a bonus in the next cycle. I watched her and watched the way her eyes glanced past my phone as if they were allergic to logs and times. I said the shop had been busy. I said I was making stew and that I had already seasoned the meat. I asked about her day. She talked until the air ran out, and then she kissed my cheek as if that always solved it. I started the stew and answered emails, and did not break the silence, and did not fill it with smoke. I moved my whole life to text after dinner. If Megan wanted something from me, she could write it. If Evan wanted to reach me for work, he could send an invoice or an apology. I would accept one of those and not the other. I called a lawyer in town named Amara Dalton. She has the kind of voice that calms rooms and makes foolish men think she likes them when she is really measuring how far they plan to fall. I told her what I had and what I suspected, and I told her I did not plan to shout at anyone. I said I wanted the truth in a binder and a judge to nod at the math. She said that is her favorite kind of case. She told me to gather what the house gives me under the law. She told me to keep my hands clean of illegal recordings. She told me to get statements from vendors and people who write things down for a living. She told me to use the word trespass if either man enters my property without my consent, and to keep all conversation in writing. Then she told me to eat and to rest and to remember that calm is not weakness. Calm is a tool. I went room to room like a man who has lost a small part and knows it is shiny enough to reveal itself if you keep the light moving. In the bedroom, I found a bracelet box without a receipt in the drawer with the scarves. In the laundry room, a valet ticket had fallen behind a bottle of detergent like a leaf losing courage. In the garage, a rental agreement for a storage unit showed my name in a handwriting that pretended it was mine. I photographed everything under good light and set the originals aside. The next day, I drove to the hotel from the valet ticket and asked about logs. The manager said a lawful request would be honored. He said they keep both digital and paper records because redundancy is honesty. I thanked him like a neighbor. I did not push. Pushing wakes up defenses that do not need to be awake yet. I visited the storage facility and asked to see the contract that bore my name. The clerk slid the file over and watched me read. The signature looked like mine if my hand had been guided by a person who thought I do not own a spine. I asked for a copy. The clerk made one without drama because drama does not help a person meet a quota. Inside the unit, dust settled on a few boxes. One box held nothing but old clothes. Another held a pair of shoes that do not belong to me and do not fit Megan. The last held a small bag with packing slips from a jeweler across town and a note that said, "Pick up on Friday," next to a number that turned out to be Evan. I did not touch anything else. I closed the unit and let the dust continue its quiet work. A week moved like a slow current. I kept working jobs. I answered clients. I stacked boards in rows that would not shame my father. At night, I looked at the lock logs and made a chart. 2 codes we had not used before appeared again and again on Wednesdays and Fridays between 10 and 2. The hours when my calendar says glue up or pick up or install. The codes corresponded to short deletes, as if the person responsible believed that erasing the key erases the memory of the door. I compared the codes to the doorbell clips and saw a choreography that would have been impressive if it were not my life being used as a dance floor. I told my mother I would be at the family dinner on Sunday. She said good, because she had a roast that she had promised my father she would perfect one day, and she might have done it. My father asked if I would bring a bottle of something for after. I said I would bring 2, and he laughed in the way men laugh when they believe they can still carry a tractor engine up a hill if someone made a dare bad enough. I asked if Evan would be there. My mother said of course, and asked if I was bringing Megan. I said yes, and heard my own voice like a radio in another room. I hung up and wrote a note on a card that said, "Make it plain," and then I turned the card over and wrote the times of the 2 codes for the past month. I put the card in my wallet. I ate stew and washed dishes and slept a good sleep that felt like a skill and not a lucky accident. On Sunday afternoon, I printed what needed printing. Smart lock logs, camera stills, bank statements with the charges marked in pencil, the valet copy, the storage agreement that tried to be my name. I placed everything in 2 envelopes because I knew I would need one for Megan and one for Evan. I did not type a speech. I have never liked speeches, even at weddings. I planned to read 2 short paragraphs and then leave them to explain themselves to people who would already understand. People always understand, even when they pretend they do not. Understanding is not the problem. Courage is. We arrived at my parents' house under a sky that looked like canvas stretched tight. Megan sat in the passenger seat and scrolled her phone like it had secrets to give her. She asked if I was all right. I said I was steady. She said my steady looks like a storm when I am not smiling. I said I would work on smiling when the shop allows it. She rolled her eyes in a way that might have been adorable last year. We went inside and found my mother arranging vegetables, and my father pretending he was not sneaking pieces of bread from the cutting board. Evan arrived late with a grin that tried too hard to relax. He hugged my mother long and clapped my father on the shoulder, and then he looked at me like a thief looking at a lock he thinks he can pick a second time. We ate and talked about none of the important things. That is how families survive the parts that would crack them. After dessert, I stood and thanked my mother for the meal. I said I had a note to read quickly before I left to finish a delivery. I took out the envelopes and placed one in front of Megan and one in front of Evan. I read the words I had written in pencil on a slip of paper. They said that I know exactly what has been happening and that I do not need anyone to tell me a story. They said that the logs and the stills and the statements and the signatures speak. They said that from this minute forward, all communication with me will be in writing, and that any entry to my property without permission will be treated as trespass. They said that I would be filing for divorce, and that I would be moving to protect the house and the shop and the accounts. They said that I wish no one harm, but I will accept none either. Then I put the paper in my pocket and walked out into the evening air that had been waiting for me like a friend who does not demand a timeline. Behind me, voices went up and down. My mother called my name and then did not call it a second time because she loves me enough to know when to stop. I drove home. I placed my phone on the counter under the eye of the doorbell and sent a text to Amara that said, "Envelopes delivered as planned." She sent back a single line that said, "Good work," and I felt a relief that was not joy and not sadness. It was the relief you feel when a long cut runs straight to the end without burning the wood. The week that followed felt strange and clean. Megan moved to a friend place and sent short messages about logistics. I answered with dates and times and kept sentences small enough to fit inside a box. Evan sent 2 texts that did not include the words sorry or mistake. They included the word complicated. Complicated is what people say when they want absolution without a bill. I forwarded the messages to Amara, and then I set my phone to do not disturb for anyone not in my client list or my parents. I worked. I cooked. I called the hotel manager and asked what form a lawful request should take. He explained it with the care of a man who has practiced this many times and prefers when the person asking already knows the difference between a warrant and a wish. I wrote down his instructions and gave them to Amara. She smiled in that small way again when she read them and said the word chain. Amara filed for divorce with a request for exclusive use and possession of the house for the period of the case. She attached the logs and the clips and the receipts and the copy of the storage agreement. She asked for a temporary order restraining unauthorized entry by Evan and by the other man. She asked for preservation of financial records. She asked the court to consider a constructive trust over funds spent on the affair, including hotel stays, jewelry, and any rentals or storage fees. She wrote with the precision of a craftsperson who can feel the weight of a hammer through paper. The court set a hearing for the following week. I read the notice like it was a weather report for a storm I had planned for and therefore did not fear. A small detail arrived that pleased me. The hotel valet log showed a pickup late on a Friday by Evan in a car registered to Megan. The log included the time and the last three of the plate and the initials of the attendant, because attendants write as if the world depends on their entry being legible. It does. The log time matched the smart lock entry 10 minutes later. A clip captured the door swinging open with care and a pair of shadows that thought they were smarter than angles. I added the printout to the envelope marked Evidence and felt my heart slow down by a degree. I listened to the shop music low and fixed a door for a customer who had a toddler and a dog and a belief that doors should forgive. While the glue set, I looked at the afternoon light on the floor and felt old and brand new at the same time. A life is only a house you maintain. Some beams will rot if you do not walk the foundation with a flashlight once in a while. That is not romance. That is maintenance. Romance without maintenance is just decoration that pretends to hold weight. I will not pretend anymore. The hearing date arrived. The judge looked the way many judges look in small counties. A face that has heard every version of a stupid idea and knows how to sort patience from performance. Amara laid out the sequence. She did not make a show. She put logs and stills and receipts where the court could see them and explained without adjectives. Megan counsel tried to paint the picture as a marriage under stress that had leaned on family for comfort and had slipped into poor decisions. The judge asked about the storage agreement and who had signed Daniel's name. The lawyer said there was confusion. The judge said there is confusion and there is forgery, and the difference matters. The order granted me exclusive use and possession of the house for 90 days, prohibited unauthorized entry by third parties, and instructed both sides to preserve financial records for the last year. The judge said he would take up constructive trust at a later stage, but noted that the evidence so far supported the request. He set a review hearing. I walked out with Amara and breathed as if someone had opened windows I had not known were painted shut. At home, I changed the codes and set the lock to notify me when any new code is created. I adjusted the camera angle on the side yard so that it catches the gate and the first 3 steps toward the deck. I spoke to the neighbor who had texted me first and thanked him on the sidewalk where gratitude belongs. He said, "Men do not often take bad news well." I said, "I am trying to be a man who does not make messes bigger." He said the neighborhood is improved by that sort of goal. I agreed. Megan sent a long message asking to meet in person to discuss feelings and the future. I replied once that all matters will be handled through counsel and that I wish her well. She escalated to calls that I did not answer and then to shorter messages that alternated between accusation and remorse. I saved them all. Evan asked about a tool he had left at the shop. I said he could send someone to pick it up at the curb on Friday at noon and that I would leave it in a bag with his name on it. He replied with a thumb emoji that made me feel like the world has too many people who think a symbol excuses a lack of words. I left the bag on the curb at noon. It was gone by 12:10. Compliance with the hotel request produced the valet log and the basic guest ledger for the nights in question. The ledger did not include all names, but it included initials, and those initials matched the jewelry receipt in the storage unit that had a pickup date for the same day. Amara drew a line with a pencil. It did not have to be darker than that. She prepared a motion to impose a constructive trust over funds spent on the affair and for reimbursement into the marital estate. She included the storage unit rent and the jewelry and the hotel charges and the meals that were far enough from home to be a choice and not an accident. She also prepared a notice of trespass to serve on Evan, which we delivered by certified mail and in person through a deputy who did not smile because this was work and not theater. People who have never had to assemble their own quiet war imagine that victory arrives with horns. It does not. It arrives with stamped pages and a house that does not argue when you turn the key. It arrives with meals you cook and eat and wash without breaking a plate. It arrives with sun on a floor that used to feel like a crime scene and now feels like a room. I allowed myself small celebrations. I fixed the sticky drawer in the kitchen that had asked politely for months. I organized the screws and the bolts that had gathered like cliques in high school. I replaced a bulb in the hallway with one that does not hum. None of this fixes a heart. All of it helps a life. Mediation came next because the court likes to try that route before inviting a trial to chew everyone to the bone. The mediator was a man who had seen the inside of too many boardrooms and decided to spend his middle years convincing people to shake hands without breaking wrist bones. We sat at the table, Megan on one side with her lawyer, Amara and me on the other. The mediator spoke about the value of time and the price of war and the way money can bleed without any wound to show for it. Then he asked to hear from each side. Megan cried. She said she felt unloved. She said Evan listened. She said a brother is a comfort in a way a husband cannot be when he is married to his workbench. She said she never meant to hurt anyone. She said many things a person might say when they need a rug to appear under their feet. I did not argue with any of it. I stated that I desired an orderly divorce with a fair division adjusted by a constructive trust to account for funds spent outside the marriage on the affairs. I asked for the house. I asked for my tools. I asked for peace. The mediator worked in a rhythm that reminded me of sanding. Back and forth. Light pressure. Do not dig. Take off only what you need. By afternoon, we had a framework. I would keep the house. Megan would receive a fair share of other assets, except that the constructive trust would reduce her side by the amount spent on the affair. The trust would be calculated using the ledger we had built, with judgment interest added from the date of filing. Evan was not at the table because he did not belong there. He would receive a letter from Amara that copied the trespass notice and warned that any further contact beyond civil family occasions would be treated as harassment. The mediator drafted the terms, and we signed a tentative agreement subject to the judge's final order. Megan looked at me like a singer who had forgotten the words to a song that used to make her famous in small rooms. I packed my folder and left without asking anyone to clap. Days became weeks. The shop filled with work because people still need tables and doors and shelves even when a man is rebuilding his house, one legal filing at a time. On Fridays, I drove out to drop off pieces and pick up checks, and I listened to a radio station that plays the kind of music that does not demand anything except that you be human for a few more minutes. I came home and watered the small tree in the yard that had survived a dry season I had not noticed because I'd been busy looking at the wrong horizon. I slept. I woke. I went into the shop and cut straight lines and let the sawdust settle on my boots until my boots looked like a man who works for a living. A package arrived from the hotel with documents authenticated for court. Inside was the valet log with initials. The clerk had also included a note saying that they appreciate guests who remain civil and that the process is easier when the person asking understands that everyone is doing a job. I placed the note in the folder because courtesy is also evidence. It tells a judge that when you met the world, you did not throw plates to get your way. You used the door, and you said please and thank you. And you left a tip for the person who found the paper you needed in a room full of boxes that all looked the same. The judge signed the final order. The constructive trust returned money to the estate and then to me as part of the division. Exclusive use of the house was extended until the property exchange was complete. Trespass orders remained in effect. We were advised to maintain civility. I had no trouble with that. Civility had been the point. Civility and boundaries and a ledger that a grown person could respect in the morning. I thanked Amara and asked how to close the file. She said she would send me a copy with tabs and a letter that lists what to keep and for how long. She said I did well, and that if I wanted to send a note to the hotel manager, she would not stop me. I did. He replied with a line about hoping we never meet under those circumstances again. I believed him. When it was over, the house was exactly the same and entirely different. The table was the same. The stove was the same. The side gate still stuck in cold mornings and eased up in the afternoon. The difference sat under the bone. The rooms had stopped lying. They had discovered they could be honest again. I still had to live in them. Living is work. The stories you tell yourself about your worth and what you will accept and what you will not accept need sweeping like floors. I swept. I mopped. I opened windows. I oiled hinges. I put new felt pads on chair legs so that when people sat, they did not scrape the past across the wood. Evan moved to a place on the other side of town. A cousin said he was doing odd jobs and complaining that life had turned against him. Life does not turn. It keeps going straight. People turn away from their own lane and then wonder why the shoulder is full of gravel. Megan took a job in a different city. I found that out months later when a letter forwarded to the house included a change of address form. I wished her well without writing it. Wishing people well is a position you can hold in your chest without sending a memo. I kept working. I taught a kid from the high school how to square a frame and how to keep his hands clear when a piece kicks. He asked why I always talk about patience, like it is a tool. I told him it is one. It is the tool that makes the other tools safer. He nodded in the way a 17-year-old nods when he is pretending he's not listening, but will hear every word later when he gets into a mess and needs a voice to play in his head that is not trying to sell him something. I ran into the neighbor who had sent the first message. He asked how things were. I said the house is quiet and the shop is busy, and those two facts are a ladder. He laughed at the ladder line and said he would use it when his nephew needed one less bar story in his life. We shook hands, and I went back to work, and I did not look back at my own house with dread. That was new, and I noticed it, and I gave myself a small trophy for it, in the form of a good sandwich eaten slowly. There were flashes now and then. A smell from a hotel lobby as I passed through the city. A flash of silver on a wrist in a line at the bank. A laugh that reminded me of a night I should have been at home. The flashes came and went like summer storms. I let them pass. I did not stand in them. I stepped into doorways where the lesson lives. The lesson is this: you cannot stop other people from lying. You can prevent their lies from setting your house on fire by keeping receipts and boundaries and a willingness to use the word no without adding apology after it. I joined a league that plays ball on Thursdays. I am not good. I am not bad. I am a man who runs and throws and laughs and slaps backs and then goes home and sleeps like the day did its job. A teammate asked if I was seeing anyone. I said I am seeing a new version of my own life and that she requires all my attention for now. He said that is a line, and I said it is also true. He said fair enough. One night I took out the envelopes from that Sunday dinner and I read through the papers again. Not to hurt myself. To thank the person I had been for doing the boring work. The person who prints and staples and labels and shows up on time and does not give the other side a performance they can point to and call evidence. I am grateful to that version of me. He saved me months of shouting that would not have moved a judge 1 inch toward a conclusion. As fall arrived, the shop took on a pair of big jobs that would carry me through winter. I hired a second helper and told him we would do honest work and finish on time and not talk a big game. We could not back up with angles and glue and patience. He agreed to the deal and showed up at dawn with coffee as if he had invented time. We sanded and cut and drove and installed. We got paid. The checks cleared. Life can be that simple if you do not invite people who love to complicate it. I received a letter from the court with the final notice that the case was closed. I filed it in a drawer with other papers that prove a person can survive a thing and not wear it like a uniform forever. I went to the store and bought food and came home and cooked and sat at the table and ate what I had made with my hands. I cleaned the kitchen and stood at the sink and felt the quiet take a seat where panic used to sit and swing its legs like a kid who is happy to be allowed at the table. I thought about writing a message to Evan that said, "Take responsibility for once, because the day is coming when the world will stop showing you mercy." I did not write it. The world knows its job. It does not need me to help. I thought about writing a message to Megan that said, "I hope you find a life that does not need an audience." I did not write that one either. Silence is not cruelty when it is the right size for the truth. Sometimes silence is the only sentence that holds. On a cold morning, I drove out to deliver a table to a couple who had saved for it and sent me photos of the room as if it were a nursery and the table a child. I carried the top inside with the husband while the wife held the door and laughed at her own excitement. We set the table, and it fit so well that we all stood still for a second, as if the room had just taken a breath it had been holding. They paid, and I left, and I sat in the truck and smiled at the kind of joy that asks for nothing beyond a surface that sits level and holds plates without complaint. If you ask me what I learned, I could fill a page. I will give you the short version. Rage will not keep your house. Paper will. Calm will. Boundaries will. Honest work will. People who write things down and show up to testify when the day comes will. Neighbors who knock on the door when they see something that does not add up will. The law can be slow. It can also be a friend if you treat it with respect and patience, and you do not ask it to be your sword when what you need is a scale. I lay in bed at night and listen to the house settle. It creaks and ticks and sighs. Houses do that when the air changes. People do too. I let the sounds tell me that the structure holds. I do not lie awake inventing debates I will never win. I do not rehearse speeches for people who are no longer seated in the first row of my life. I close my eyes and see the shop the next morning, and the list on the bench and the order for screws I forgot on Thursday. I sleep. I wake. I get up. I go to work. I make things square. Months later, a package arrived with a bracelet I had never seen. A note from the jeweler said final notice returned to sender. I walked it to the post office and sent it back certified to the store with a line that said, "Not mine." The clerk read the note and looked at me and nodded in the way people nod when they have seen a lot of small tragedies and know that the right response is neither pity nor curiosity. It is to hand over a receipt and say, "Have a good day," and mean it. Sometimes I pass the storage facility and think of the dust on the boxes and the way a man will try to use your name to hold a thing he wants until he is done with it. I remind myself that my name belongs to me, and that it stays on work I am proud to show, and on contracts I have read, and on papers I would be happy to see on a judge's desk. I have cut it into tables and stamped it on invoices and carved it into small gifts for friends. That is where it lives now, not on a rental unit where love went to pretend it had a house, but on things that do. Winter came soft, and then hard, and then soft again. I fixed a fence for a woman who had been widowed and who made me tea and told me about her husband Hans and the way he had fixed things slowly and right. We stood in the yard and looked at the fence as if it could hear us. Maybe it could. Wood has memory. It holds shape when you treat it with care. So does a person. So does a life. I drove away with the taste of tea and the feeling that the world has more good in it than trouble once you decide to stop feeding the trouble with your time. By spring, the house felt like a ship I had refitted. New line, fresh paint, the same hull and the same journey, but with a crew that understands the job. The crew is me. I still get lonely. I still stand at the sink some nights and think about what was promised and what was delivered. Then I rinse the plate and put it on the rack and turn off the light and go to bed, because the morning expects me to act like a man who is alive and has work to do. I try not to disappoint mornings. They are very generous. They arrive again and again, even when you have not earned another one. I do not keep a scoreboard. I keep a calendar. It has deliveries and installs and a few dinners with friends, and a note every Sunday to call my mother and father. The calendar looks ordinary. That is the dream. Ordinary days where the only surprise is that a sunset earned your attention or that a loaf of bread rose more politely than the last one. Ordinary is the first prize after you have survived a circus. If my brother ever finds his way back to a decent lane, I will shake his hand in a parking lot someday and wish him steady work. I will not invite him inside. That may sound cruel to someone who likes stories with easy mercy at the end. Mercy without boundaries is not mercy. It is neglect dressed up as a virtue. I will offer him the kind of mercy a man can carry without dropping it. Respect, space, no stage. And if you ask whether I still believe in marriage, I will say I believe in people who do not make other people into ladders. I believe in kitchens that are honest. I believe in locks that tell the truth. I believe in the kind of love that brings home a receipt and a laugh, and does not need a storage unit to hide the pieces that will not fit into daylight. I believe in mornings. I believe in work. I believe in the sound a house makes when it forgives the people inside it and decides to be a home again. I did not expect forgiveness to feel anything like relief. Forgiveness is not a favor to the offender. It is a maintenance task for the person who remains. I did not write letters about it or say it into a phone. I did it with work and with time and with routines that turned pain into sawdust and sawdust into compost for the next project. On some mornings, I swept the shop floor and thought I could see the outline of the past inside the dust. I swept anyway. The outline does not get a vote. There was a day when the court clerk misfiled a document and we lost an hour sorting it out. Amara apologized, though it was not her fault, and I watched her keep her temper in a way that taught me more about law than any show on television. The law is a long hallway with a lot of doors. Some open easy and some stick, and some will not open at all. You keep walking and you try the next door and you remember that the hallway is still your friend if you follow the signs. My father came by the shop with a box of old chisels that had belonged to his father. He said they had waited long enough in a drawer and wanted to live in a hand again. We sharpened them together, and he told stories about jobs he remembered and jobs he had forgotten, till the smell of oil and metal made the air feel like a sermon no one had to preach. He did not ask about Megan or Evan. He asked how the new helper worked out and whether I needed a second truck. He knows the difference between gossip and care. The neighbor who first texted me stopped one afternoon while I was painting trim and handed me a small notebook. He said he had written down what he saw in case it would help later. Dates, times, descriptions of who came and which gate they used. He said he did not think he was a hero. He said he simply believes that neighborhoods belong to people who watch each other backs without making it a show. I took the notebook and thanked him with the kind of thanks that travel from the mouth to the chest and stay there. Megan mother wrote to my mother and said she hoped time would soften me. My mother told me about the letter only because she tells me most things. I said, I am already soft where it matters and iron where it counts. She said that sounds like my father. He grinned from the seat by the window and said a man can do worse than to be compared to a person who fixes a fence when it breaks, instead of talking about the idea of fences. One evening, I sat on the back steps and listened to the side gate knock as the wind tried it. I had fixed the latch and it held. The sound reminded me that not every knock is a person. Some are only weather asking if you are paying attention. I am. I go to the gate and check it now and then. It stays closed until I decide to open it. This is not a metaphor. It is a fact that pleases me and happens to teach a small lesson if you want one. Evan sent a message months later that read like a script written by a committee. He said he was in a program. He said he wanted to make amends. He said he was going to church with a friend. He asked for a chance to talk. I did not reply. My silence was not an act of spite. It was a boundary shaped by long days, with a ledger and a calendar, and a house that had chosen to trust me again. I am open to the idea that he will one day be a man I can greet without the old heat. I am not open to rewriting what happened to make him feel better. There were small afflictions that visited in the quiet, a memory that tried to put me back in a hallway with a knock I did not want to hear. A smell in a grocery aisle that took me to a hotel lobby. These moments arrived and then left like birds that mistake a window for open air. I learned to let them thud and recover and fly away. The glass is clean. The house stands. I do not need to chase every shadow that thinks it knows my name. Some clients began to come to me because they had heard I am reliable. That is all I ever wanted anyone to say. Reliable is not exciting. Reliable is a boat that holds when the wind changes. Reliable is a line that stays true even when your hands are tired. Reliable is a man who brings a receipt and returns the tool he borrowed the way it was before he touched it. My calendar filled with reliable, and my life cooled to a temperature where mornings are a blessing and not a dare. On a long drive to deliver a headboard I built for a couple out near the state line, I stopped at a diner where the waitress called everyone by first names after the second visit and kept a sugar packet castle by the register. She asked if I wanted the special, and I said yes, because a person cannot live only on prudence. The pie tasted like someone cared. I left a tip that made her smile, and I drove back on the old road that lets you see the river. The river looked like a decision made 1,000 years ago and honored every day since. I took comfort from that. Work brought me into a house that felt like mine in a parallel life. Same floor plan. Same small creek near the hallway, different photos, different laughter. I did the job and left and sat in my truck and let myself feel the ache that comes when you realize how many versions of your life could have been if one door had different hinges. Then I turned the key and drove away, because the version I have now is solid and I have signed for it with my own name. A teacher from my old school asked me to speak to a shop class about running a small business. I told the kids that honesty is a tool, and punctuality is a tool, and clarity is a tool. I told them to keep receipts, and to say no to jobs that smell wrong, even if money is noisy. I told them a man who can build a table and keep his word will eat. They clapped because their teacher clapped first. I shook hands and left, and felt like the town had paid me back. For days I could not carry myself. I ran into a woman from the bank who had helped me sort out a fraud alert related to the storage unit. She asked if everything had resolved. I said it had. She said she sees a lot of people make large problems larger with noise. She said the quiet ones often win. I said that is my plan. She said it seems to be working. I thanked her and walked out into air that felt like permission. There was a morning when I realized I had not thought about the bracelet in a month. The space in my mind, where it used to hang like a sign, had been taken up by a design for a corner bench with hidden storage that a client wanted for a breakfast nook. This is how healing arrives. It does not knock. It shows up wearing work boots and asks for a pencil. Amara sent a holiday card with a drawing of a scale that looked like it had been carved by someone who had never seen a courtroom and still understood balance. I placed it on the mantel. It made the room feel like an honest place to sit. I think that is what justice is when you strip it of speeches and marble, a place where you can sit without bracing. My mother asked if I am happy. I said, I am busy. She said that is a kind of happy. My father said he prefers calm to happy. I said I will take both if the day has room. We laughed. We ate. We did not discuss Evan. We did not discuss Megan. Love is not always talking things to death. Sometimes love is slicing pie and asking if anyone needs more salt on the meat. I passed the hotel one day on an errand and looked up at the windows without feeling lost. Just rooms. Just glass. Just people moving through their hours. some telling lies, and some telling the truth, and many merely trying to stay awake until they can sleep in a bed that forgives them. I wish them all that bed. I know what it is to need one. A friend who had kept his distance during the worst of it invited me to help him frame a porch. We worked until our arms shook, and then we sat on the steps and drank water and said the kinds of true things men only say when they are too tired to pretend they are made of metal. He said he was sorry he had disappeared when my life bent. I said I understood. Not everyone knows which end of a crisis needs holding. He said he would do better next time. I said, we are both learning. The side gate still knocks on windy nights. I like that. It reminds me that the world will always test your latches, and that the answer is not to curse the wind, but to keep the hardware maintained. I keep a small kit near the door. Oil, screws, a driver. That kit has saved more than one night from becoming a story with shouting as the main character. Sometimes I think about the version of me who would have shouted at the table on Sunday and thrown a glass just to watch it break. That version might have received pity and applause from people who like drama. He would not have received what I wanted, which is a house I can walk into without feeling like a suspect, and a life where my name appears only on things I respect. I am grateful that man did not show up. The one who did kept his hands open and his voice plain and his head clear. He deserves the bed he sleeps in now.